All right, welcome back. I'm really happy that John Butcher is here. He told me to call his presentation There's a Whole World Out There. And what is hidden behind this phrase, you will hear now. So,
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much for coming here and for the invitation, Matthias. Um, it might look like this is going to be a bit what I did on my holidays, but it's actually about something I've been engaged in for the last 25 years or so, whenever the opportunity presents itself, and that is playing in unusual locations, non-concert locations. This I find, I'm talking principally about playing as a soloist, and I find it of great value to operate in these kind of situations, because my natural inclination is to always make music with groups of people rather than to act as a soloist. I find a lot of solo playing too hermetic. And putting yourself into a situation of unusual acoustics, unusual locations, if you like, provides some of the inspiration that one gets from one's fellow musicians when one is improvising in more conventional circumstances. One of the earliest opportunities I got for this was on my first tour of Japan in 2002. The tour was organized for me by a Japanese enthusiast called Hisashi Terauchi, who organized all the concerts and just sent me a list of names of where we were going. And the first few were much as I had imagined, in small clubs. One was in a jazz kisser, which is a small cafe, nearly always run by a quite fearsome matriarch who has an incredible vinyl record collection of jazz, which he plays for the customers and then invites musicians in to give live performances. Anyway, one day we set off for the next gig, and I said, well, where are we playing tonight? And he said, oh, it's the Oya Museum. And I thought, okay, fine. And it turned out when we got there, this was the Oya Museum. Oya is a town in Utsunomiya, about 100 kilometers north of Tokyo. And the location is actually the site of a large volcanic mountain, volcanic in the sense that it was created through a volcano eruption, eons ago. But it's got a very special kind of rock, and that rock has been mined for centuries for building material, with the result that it's effectively a hollowed out mountain, the size of many cathedrals. So this is the outside of it. If you go down inside about 60 meters, you enter a series of very sizable, very cold, very damp chambers where the quarrying has occurred over a time. That is one of those chambers, and you can see there's a whole string of them there. So it was a fabulous location to play, but I realized immediately that it wasn't the sort of situation where I could just import my usual musical methods. I couldn't just import pieces in there. As an improviser, that's something I try not to do anyway, but this really emphasized the fact, because certain things will work here and be successful, other things will not be successful. There's nothing new about this. We all know that certain acoustics suit certain kinds of music. Some chamber pieces by Bach will work wonderfully in the acoustic of a good church. If you stick on Wagner in a good church, very often it's going to sound like mush and just be totally inappropriate. Music has always been made for its acoustic situations, and as improvisers we have a head start there, because we are able to change our music according to the situations we find ourselves. We're not forced to go in and play a particular thing. We can adapt and evolve. And what was fascinating for me on this occasion was to have to kind of do that in real time with no preparation and no real expectation of what it's going to be like. So without further ado, I'd like to play actually the first piece I played that time, which those of you who know my playing will recognize qualities in it which are me, but it's me trying to adapt to this extraordinary acoustic that you hear. It wasn't a particularly comfortable concert to play because the instrument was extremely cold from being this place has an ambient temperature average through the year of about 7 or 8 degrees. And those of you that play wind instruments, and particularly if you play metal wind instruments, know that as soon as you start off, it gets in a cold situation, it gets full of condensation. So the pads become clogged up, the reed starts getting soggy, your fingers are freezing cold, the air in your lungs is cold, and if you're trying to cyclic breathe, it's beginning to hurt. So it was a struggle. But listening back to the recording, I was surprisingly pleased by it, because what it obviously did there, which a lot of big acoustics do, is it builds up the low frequencies. The low frequencies take longer to decay than high frequencies, generally speaking. And in these large spaces, you can build up a overlapping of low frequencies. And that was something that 10 years previously I'd made pieces from by multi-tracking saxophones. Multi-tracking my own saxophones, working with overtones so that the fundamentals of the tones build up in the way that church bells do, where the fundamentals as the church bells peal, the fundamentals start growing and start producing a bed underneath the sounds. I felt this was doing a similar thing, but of course with just one saxophone and in a real-time situation. So I decided to put the record out, put the recording out as a record, and it, 2 or 3 people heard it, and eventually, some years later, I got a surprise invitation from somebody who'd heard it, who inviting me to research doing this kind of thing in a series of locations in Scotland and in the Orkney Isles, which are to the north of Scotland, in spaces where he was going to. It was a team. They're called Arika, Barry Essen and Brian E. McIntyre, and they're a wonderful arts organisation. These days, much more engaged in areas of the arts that can be connected to the political manifestations of marginal ways of creating art, if you like. But at that time, they had a more straightforward interest in sonics, and they researched all the places and invited myself and the Japanese sound artist Akio Suzuki, who is a fabulous artist who creates his own instruments, to tour together playing solos and duos. And okay, hang on. I'll come back to that. One of the concerts, one of the places they invited us, which in some ways was the least interesting in terms of location, was this rather phallic mausoleum on the outskirts of Glasgow, built to contain the body of some dead Scottish aristocrat a long time ago, and it's called the Hamilton Mausoleum. And it's actually quite famous because it's supposed to have the longest reverberation time of any functional building in Europe. The low frequencies in there have a reverberation time of about 19 seconds. There are longer ones, I believe, in things like oil tanks and these kind of situations. But this is quite famous for this, and you get guided tours of it, and the guide opens the door there, and once everybody's inside, he just slams it for dramatic effect, and the whole place explodes with sound. As far as I know, there's been very little recording done in there, so I was very happy to do that. And I mentioned briefly last night that a frustrating thing about the saxophone is the way the sound is connected to the physical action. It's an instrument that's on or off. When you're breathing into it, it produces a sound. When you stop, by and large, it doesn't. The only way it carries on is if you're working in a acoustic that allows it. You don't have that pleasure of the decay curve, you know, that a piano has, that even a guitar has. You don't have that pleasure of overlappings and harmonies that you know that stringed instruments have. All those aspects of music making that are to do with how two things: how you can create a sound and allow it to coexist with another sound, make the physical action and enjoy the sound before you move on to the next physical action. Those aren't really there. I mean, I think there's a reason that there aren't sort of many 3-hour Morton Feldman saxophone pieces. It's just not right for it. So although I've done quite a lot of attempts myself to change the saxophone from a monophonic instrument, turn it into something which is capable of many tones and many colours at the same time, that's always a slightly fake situation, because it always is involved with a physical action. But in here, you can do it. I mean, I did some very simple things. You just play a note and it sits there, and you think, far out. I can, you know, I've got someone to play with. You know, I can work with this. And so I did one simple piece there, which was nothing more than microtonal variations on long tones with some timbral differences, and which also slightly changed, because what you can do in these spaces is movement in the space. If it's not too symmetrical a space, will change the reflections, and you get different interferences depending on where you're pointing yourself. a good 20 years before this, on the first time I visited New York, I guess around 1980, I'd been playing saxophone for a few years then, self-taught. I walked into a music store in there and bought my first saxophone tutor book. I'd been learning the instrument by playing in bands, basically, for the previous sort of 7 or 8 years, and all kinds of bands, playing Sousa marches and avant rock, and you name it, I tried it. Anyway, so I thought it was about time for a saxophone tuition book, and I bought Larry Teal's The Art of the Saxophone, and there's a diagram in it explaining how we control the saxophone tone. And he explained that the resonance you're trying to shape and control is made up of the vibrations in your lungs and chest cavity, then in your neck, or the trachea as he calls it, the throat, which wind players know because you put so much control in what you're doing with the throat, the oral cavity, which is the mouth, and then you finally reach the mouthpiece and the body of the instrument. And of course, the only thing that's vibrating is the only thing apart from, the thing that you bought the instrument for to vibrate is the little piece of wood that vibrates in your mouth here. Sorry, it doesn't work like that, does it? Yeah, okay. Well, I think we all know where saxophone reeds go. And when I started playing in these truly resonant spaces, it drew my mind back to this image, which I think I'd recognized before, wondering why he stopped at the end of the instrument, really, because the kind of difficult problem area of the world outside there is a very important part of it as well. When you first start playing, you may not pay much attention to acoustics, but you play in a room, you think, oh, the instrument sounds better in here than it did last night. You might not think why, it's doing that. You just recognise you're so concerned about playing the music. But as I got more involved in improvised playing, I really came to recognise that the actual form of the music depended on the sound of the room, the actual kind of music you were making. And the very common experience is that if you're on a tour and you play one night and something is successful, this is in a freely improvising group. The next night it may evolve to a similar area, and you think, well, okay, let's go with this for a while and see it, and it just doesn't work. And you think, well, why is it not working? It's not to do with our efforts or our intentions. And you realize, well, it's just the room is wrong for it. That music that worked last night worked because it was happening in that acoustic, and it's not going to work in this acoustic. So you have to do something different. So almost without paying attention to it, as an improviser, you're responding to these kinds of situations where you're adjusting yourself to the acoustics of a space. All musicians do it. Musicians playing completely notated music do it. But we do it far more, to the extent that the entire content and form of the music is dependent on the room and changeable by us in that room. And playing these resonant spaces really, particularly that first time in the Stone Museum in Japan, and I took the first breath and blew out into the room, I really felt, wow, that space is actually the missing bit to that diagram. You could feel it's like you could actually feel your inside, stretching out into the back of all those caverns. I know that's fanciful, but it really felt connected. And it's not just a fanciful thing, because it affects how the instrument plays. How the reed vibrates depends on what room you're playing in, because all the reflections in the room feed back into the instrument, and they can either help or hinder the production of the tone. Reeds play differently in different spaces. It's why it's pointless checking out reeds, for my kind of music anyway, checking out reeds backstage, because a reed that feels like it's working well there is most likely going to be a disaster in a completely sized space, which is why I kind of can annoy my colleagues enormously by sitting in the room for like half an hour before a gig, working through a couple of boxes of reeds to try and think, okay, what's the right reed for this room? Because the room physically affects how the instrument plays. So we have this as a consequence of playing in big spaces, amplified. You know, it's a much more, it's a much bigger consideration, and we're able to change the music, make music of the space rather than music in the space. I find in these kinds of situations. Now, let's find it. On this tour of Scotland and the Orkneys, I did a little bit of work with a technique that I've used off and on since the 1980s, which is extremely simple. It's saxophone controlled feedback, and all you do is put a microphone in the bell of the instrument, attach it to an amplifier, and try and control feedback tones by altering the length of the saxophone column, which you do by changing the fingerings. I'd started it in the mid-80s whilst I was experimenting with amplified saxophone in general, amplifying small sounds. And it was kind of interesting, but I was playing with only acoustic musicians then, and somehow it didn't really seem to add anything useful to the situation. And it was only when I started playing with some more electronic and computer-based musicians in the 90s that it became I felt it became useful for me again. I explored it in some more detail. And it's an extremely room-dependent technique. I said that the ordinary wind instruments and how the reeds vibrate depend on the room. Well, this, you know, depends with knobs on. So I also did a feedback piece in the Hamilton Mausoleum, which I'll play a little bit of, which is that one. and that was a room within which it worked very well. So well at one point in rehearsal that I was working with some very low frequencies, and suddenly all these loose pieces of plaster which were on the walls and the ceiling of it started fluttering down like snowflakes, from the vibrations in the room being so strong that this century-old plasterwork was just not up to it. So actually, we filtered that out on the loudspeakers so as not to not to have to pay to repaint the place. And feedback I find a very interesting technique, particularly as I spent a lot of my life trying to control some of the very dark and awkward corners of the saxophone, which are very unstable. It's interesting to be using a technique which you can't really control very well and have to use it in real time in situation as an improviser. And it's a slightly frustrating technique. It won't work in a lot of situations. I was invited to do a feedback piece at the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival with their multi-speaker system, which is about 40 speakers around a room. And I went in the evening before the concert to experiment and really got things working pretty well, I thought. Came to the concert at lunchtime the next day, and it was a very cold November day in Huddersfield, which is in Yorkshire in the north of England. Everybody came in their big winter coats. It was a free concert. It was packed. I started trying to do the feedback, and almost nothing happened because they're eating so many of the frequencies of the sound, particularly the high frequencies. So what was advertised as a feedback concert instead became, an improvised saxophone concert, which is one of the advantages, again, of being an improviser. You just adapt and say, okay, that's not going to happen. I'll do something else. Other people I've noticed have been working with this technique for some years now, and I've heard some where it's clear that they're using the wrong space to try and do it. You've just got to give up if you find yourself in the wrong space and you want to use that technique. Yeah. The gain is very important, without a doubt. Yeah. And unless you want to some people get very sophisticated and start then putting things through filters, even computer systems, to try and control it, limiters. I prefer the very rough area, but the gain helps, and also the if we're getting into technicalities, the kind of orientation, the distance between the microphone and the speaker, the relative orientation of the microphone. I can do it with the saxophone, kind of Jimi Hendrix style, where you keep a fixed microphone inside and you do it purely by moving it in relationship to the amplifier. Or you can do it with a fixed microphone and you do it by moving the saxophone in relationship to the microphone.
But if you lose the high frequencies, you should get it back with more gain and a deeper octave.
Okay. Yeah, well, okay, the sound engineer on that occasion didn't know that. Want to come to Huddersfield? Yeah. Now, a fair bit of this has been about acoustical aspects of playing in resonant spaces. It's not always about that. It's in fact, that's only a small part of it. It's very connected, I think. The value of this activity is connected to the two things: the fact that it's not a concert space, the fact that people have to make a special effort to go to these locations. They're not often not that accessible. and some things to do with just general atmosphere, the feeling of a place. This next one was on the Isle of Hoy, and it's an oil tank which was used to contain oil to fuel World War II ships in the harbour there. And it's actually a war museum now. And there's 700 people who live on the island, and not all of them are improvised music fans. No, excuse me, there's 400 people live on the island. So maybe they all are, I don't know. And 70 came to this concert. Not, I think, particularly because they're interested in anything sonically, but they know this as a place of interest. And it's a place you walk in and immediately you notice the reverberations. So you may expect something unusual to happen there, something unusual to be going on. So they would listen to something and hopefully derive some pleasure from listening to something in there, which in a concert hall they might have to think, well, this isn't music, but here it's something else. And yeah, it is something else. That's what I like about it. It was a war museum. That's the inside. That would be a flashlight, a flare light for beaming into the sky, looking for aircraft. Outside there's guns and turrets. So there's a particular atmosphere there, and I played a piece which had short impulses, which I was led to by the acoustics of the place. And after a while, I realized this sounded really like gunfire. I think I'd been influenced subconsciously by this. And then I kind of developed the piece with that in mind, half thinking about what the museum was used for, what the oil tower was used for, and half dealing with the acoustics of this space. And of course there you also hear the consequences of moving around the space, sometimes slightly exaggerated by things like microphone position, which I wanted to talk a bit about trying to record these things, because they're actually, these recordings are just really pale reflections of what it's like if you experience an event like this in reality. I don't think there's going to quite be time for that. because I'd like to open it up so we can have some questions before the time slot is up. So I'd like to talk about one more piece, which was also on that tour of Scotland, which these are the standing stones of Stennis, which is on the island of Orkney. Quite an extraordinary place. And we went. The good thing about this tour was that we were able to visit each space the day before the performance, which gave time to feel the atmosphere, deal with the acoustics. Yeah. Here I'd kind of hoped it would be possible to do something a little bit like I'd done in that oil tank, getting reflections from the stones, but this was impossible. And the main problem we found was the wind. The wind was so loud that you couldn't really hear anything. It was just, whooshing past your ears, kind of making any kind of auditory performance largely impossible. So, and the evening concert was cancelled in the end because of a major storm coming in. But nevertheless, it's not good for a saxophone. So in the end, I did a little bit of experimenting, and I developed the Aeolian saxophone, which was basically with a little microphone inside to record it, allowing the wind to come in and glance off the tone holes of the saxophone and create small tones and gentle sounds, aided occasionally, I think, by a little bit of feedback creeping in. I'm not quite sure about that, but it's a little hard to hear it because of the general wind on the microphone, but this is the piece. Sorry? Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that was edited from a longer. That was edited from a longer section, but. I'm trying to remember. It's done quite a while ago, but I mean, I'm pretty sure I did try and EQ down the wind noise on that. Because it was quite extreme. So again, it's that's an acoustics-led piece, but very much connected to a one-off situation in a particular location, which is what I'm interested in. And I suppose it all boils down to it's a slightly exaggerated look at what all improvisers should attempt to do, which is to always, if you like, respond to the uniqueness of the situation they find themselves in, and to accept its uniqueness and the fact that it's not going to be reproducible. It's going to happen once, and it's going to happen that one time in front of that number of people. And then, apart from these postcards, which are, you know, pale reflections of the experience, that is it. Then it's on to the next thing. And it's got up a couple of times. What makes a good improvisation? I think it is when you can recognize that the performers are recognizing the complete uniqueness of this one-off situation which people have come to, and of which by necessity there's going to be a beginning, a middle and an end. Because so much of our musical and cultural life is fragmented now. We consume in quite fragmented bites, sound works, all kinds of things. And these playing in unusual locations, I think, are ways of really keeping the essence of what it means to be in a room with other people doing things with sound. I'll stop there and open it up for a few questions, because I think we're nearing the end. Thank you.
Thanks. It was very inspiring. I just wanted to ask, are these recording available somewhere?
Yes, yeah. These are all taken off different CDs, some of which have sold out, but there are downloads available of them.
Where and in which
I think they're nearly all on my Bandcamp page,
okay.
actually. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, John. I was wondering if there were any places you know you want to record in, but specific with specific acoustics, but either haven't yet or have found it impossible to.
No. Yes.
I'm interested for the wind piece. In this situation where you played it, did you hear the sound, or was it just more guessing? And
I did hear the sound, because there's I haven't got the picture here, but there's a couple of PA speakers behind me there.
Oh, okay, I didn't. So I was wondering, what did you hear while playing it? Okay, so you got an impression of what is happening.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I'm also wondering about the Aeolian saxophone. Did you ever try it in like a wind tunnel or something? I mean, I think there's a lot of potential to sort of really push this naturally occurring phenomena if you change the variable of the wind. And I was just interested if that is something you're curious
It's the first time it's been suggested to me, and I agree that is a very interesting proposition, because in a way you're going to get similar sounds. I mean, it's like the tone holes are almost like the lip of a flute, the flute mouthpiece, and you know, with fingerings you can change an awful lot of create a lot of different resonant frequency possibilities within it. So, who knows a good wind tunnel? I mean, I guess they have these. I mean, you're thinking of universities really to try and get into. Okay, yeah.
To anyone on the live stream who happens to be running a wind tunnel.
Yeah, that's this kind of thing. Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really amazing and relates very much to what I call tuning in, like to go to a place and really tune into the atmosphere, the space, and everything. And also to the wind piece, I can recommend do it with another player. I did it with Bernard Hawk on the violin, with the microphone inside the violin, and I had the flute. And it's amazing if you listen afterwards to it, because the phrasing is always together, because it's the wind playing the instruments. So I'm happy to do a duo with you.
Yeah, it was violin and flute. Did you say?
It was violin and flute, yes.
Yeah.
And And the problem with the flute is always when you play in a place with a lot of wind, it blows your embouchure away. So it's a really kind of struggling, but which can be
So
super
you're
interesting.
allowing both your own breath and the wind to generate the tones.
Yes, you can play with it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah,
So, yeah.
I'd like to try it with actually a larger instrument. I mean, that was just by chance. I happened to be with that. See what happens.
What about flutter echo? Do you have any experiment with flutter?
I mean, that was quite hard work because... Is that what you meant, flutter echo? Yeah. Because this was... there's a Texan artist who's, over the last 40 years, has been building these 4 buildings to house his sculptures in the West Texan desert, about 100 kilometers from El Paso. And I was invited there along with the saxophonist Joe McPhee to give a performance, and for it to be the first public invitation to these places, which he's kept private. And about 50 people travelled. It was a kind of art event, so 50 people from around the world travelled to it. And this is one of those occasions where it really wasn't about the acoustics; it was about the location. And you can see these buildings. That's just one of them. You can see on the corner there, there's the one person standing, to give you an idea of the size of it. And Joe and I decided to start playing in opposite buildings, and the audience was outside, so they would hear us, one in one building, one in the other. We could just about hear ourselves. We could just about hear each other, and we played a duet like that, and then we walked between the buildings, still playing, and swapped positions. And that was nothing to do with acoustic phenomena. That was to do with relationships, really, and relationships to distance, relationships to how remarkably we hear detail in the smallest sounds. So I could hear just a glimmer of what Joe was doing, and when I listened to the recording afterwards, I was surprised how much we were playing together. And we only had one portable stereo battery-operated recording machine, so I had to point one microphone at one building, the other microphone at the other building, and see what happened. The little flutter echo thing was from a solo section I did later, but that was about the only thing you could call an acoustic phenomenon, really. Okay.
So thank you so much, John. That was, again, really inspiring and interesting to hear all this. Today in the morning, after the films shown by Mark, I took the liberty to announce the upcoming symposium in 1 year, which will be filming, improvising with film. And now that we've been talking about resonance, I would also like to announce the symposium in 2 years' time, beginning of 2026. This is going to be about improvisation and resonance, but it will be in German again, I guess, most of the time. But 2 years' time is also a good time to still learn German if you are not able to speak. So, okay, thank you, John, once again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and now here we are continuing with the project of Georg Wissel. We will project immediately the ephemeral kinetic sound sculpture notation, maybe. And Georg will introduce how it works. He needs you as participants.
Thank you. What I'm just intending to do is some participation thing, yeah. And because I didn't want to hold a whole lecture because I'm not so wise to know everything about improvised music, but I think there is so much knowledge here all around with every person, so different ideas also. So I did put some words, some ideas, what I think for me, for my practice is important, or which are questions in my practice. Maybe I don't have an answer on this. And I would like to do something like improvisational concept, to meet up, to team up with 3 to 4 groups with 3 people, to pick 1 or 2 or how much ideas from this sculpture and to talk about it. And all the other listeners invited to group around these trios and listen, or maybe move to a next one. So we will do it simultaneously in this room, organize. And so all the listeners invited to listen, and maybe then to move to another. So like if you listen to an improvised concert, improvised music, your focus maybe sometimes switches from one constellation to another, from one instrument to another. So like this, as we never get the whole thing, but we get a mosaic, and in the end maybe something common comes out from this. And if there so it's mainly about exchange of thoughts. So this concept is, I called it ephemeral kinetic sculpture of thoughts, but it's about ephemeral kinetic sculptures of sounds, which I sometimes think as improvised music could be. So that's it. Maybe there is one trio could also, maybe they have the idea it's useless to talk about it. Maybe they would like to play, to make it acoustically with sounds, to contribute to this. That's the idea. So we have a break, and I will be happy if 5 minutes, so we can regroup these chairs also, and then I will be happy to have some people to join and to participate and to find as a trio together. Kann ich das hier ablegen auf den Tisch?